I'm back, guys, and I'm gonna be revealing some of the mysterious parts of the Idaho 4 case. We're finally gonna unveil why these guys have been so secretive. It was pretty obvious to me that some type of surveillance or a covert, controlled by, or something of the sort was going on in the grub truck video. Now, as crazy as that sounds, these things are not as CSI as you think. You see, there's a local task force in Moscow. This is under typical circumstances, and now I believe not only is there a local task force, but they've also been fed some federal money because there seems to be some white supremacy in the veins of Idaho. In fact, I'd say that it has its hands all over this case, in every way, shape, or form. How the hell would a federal task force wind up out in Moscow?
Disclaimer. This video may contain footage that could be disturbing or distressing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Chanting racist slogans.
Those in court today was founder and leader of the Patriot Front, Thomas Rousseau. He's from Texas, and according to the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League, he is a known white supremacist. So we dug a little deeper today. Here's what we found. Two of the nation's top anti-discrimination and racial justice organizations say Thomas Rousseau grew up outside of Dallas, Texas, and began showing signs of white nationalist beliefs as a young teenager. In fact, this article in the Texas Observer newspaper says the FBI has been monitoring Rousseau since he was still a student in high school, where he often wrote opinion pieces in support of conservative topics. But it was shortly after he graduated that Rousseau emerged as a leader inside another white nationalist organization, Vanguard America. Vanguard America. That hate group came into the national spotlight in 2017 after tragedy at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. One woman was killed after a man drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters. And in the aftermath of Charlottesville, the Southern Poverty Law Center says Vanguard America dissolved into chaos, and Rousseau announced his new organization, Patriot Front. Since then, Patriot Front members have protested outside of numerous events, including anti-abortion rallies, Jewish synagogues, Black Lives Matter protests, and LGBTQ pride events. Members often chant the slogan "Blood and Soil," which the Anti-Defamation League says originated in Nazi Germany, equating white European identity with the right to inherit American soil. Since its creation in 2017, Patriot Front activity has now expanded into dozens of states.
And while we are learning new details, a major issue in this case is communication, particularly by authorities. Can we start with this kind of weird development we're seeing about who exactly was the target of this? Because that narrative keeps changing from law enforcement to the prosecution's office. Can you walk us through briefly about what we're hearing from each side and how confusing it is?
Yeah, it's really, really confusing. Early on, police said that this was targeted, and we asked for more information about that for them to elaborate, and they said, we're not going to give you information, you're just going to have to trust us. We got a sit down interview here in Moscow with the prosecutor, and I asked him, what do you mean by targeted? Can you explain this? And he said, to my knowledge with the investigation, we don't have any evidence that one of the victims specifically was targeted, but we have evidence, we believe that the residence was targeted. And so that's what we went with. As they initially said that the public was not at risk, and then, of course, got pushed on that because they didn't have any information about who the killer was or what happened or a motive, and then had to backtrack on that also and say, well, we can't really say that.
white nationalists zip-tied and arrested blocks from a pride festival.
These people want violence for us, and we don't want violence for anybody.
There was at least one smoke grenade. There was multiple shields.
Coeur d'Alene police Saturday discovered the crowd crammed in a U-Haul after a 911 caller described seeing a little army at a local hotel with masks on their faces and slogans like Reclaim America on their shirts. Police charging all 31 with conspiracy to riot, noting they planned to swarm several parts of Coeur d'Alene and carried paperwork similar to an operations plan that a police or military group would put together. They traveled in from states all across the country, allegedly united by white nationalism.
They appeared to be affiliated with the group Patriot Front.
Who is Patriot Front?
Patriot Front is a white supremacist group. It is anti-Semitic, racist, and homophobic to the core.
Experts say the group formed following 2017's deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. Tonight, police in Idaho working with the FBI. Why Coeur d'Alene, Idaho?
White supremacist movement has deep roots in Idaho. And sometimes they'll choose small towns. Less security, easy to show up, less resistance.
Amid Pride Month, events across the country now on edge, knowing one small town may have dodged a violent confrontation. Maggie Vespa, NBC News.
36 members of a white nationalist group arrested just a quarter mile from a Pride event in Idaho. They were in a U-Haul truck, and tonight we learned some of the officers who actually made those arrests are now getting threats themselves. 31 men with links to the white nationalist group, the Patriot Front, charged with conspiracy to riot.
Is based in our own backyard and joins us with an update from the newsroom.
Yeah, Chris, police in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho say that North Texas-based white supremacist hate group prepared to riot in the city's downtown. 7 of the 31 men arrested live in Texas, 7 of those in the Metroplex, including Watauga, Hazlet, and Grapevine. The neo-Nazi group Patriot Front was founded by 23-year-old Thomas Rousseau, who lives in Grapevine and was arrested as well. Police say a concerned citizen called 911 when they saw the group wearing body armor loading into a U-Haul truck. They were stopped and arrested and face misdemeanor charges for conspiracy to riot. In a press conference today, police said they had shields, shin guards, and a smoke grenade, and there was, quote, no doubt that the group planned to start a riot at the city's Pride event.
That level of preparation is not something you see every day. It was very clear to us immediately that this was a riotous group that had prepared in advance to come downtown and disrupt either the Pride event or the Prayer in the Park event.
Patriot Front is a hate group that formed after the deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia 5 years ago. Researchers say they focus their efforts on university campuses and try to recruit using flyers that hide their violent rhetoric.
When you peel back the layers, I mean, they are talking about violence. They are promoting violence. So they are very consistent in that respect with what you see with the Proud Boys and some of the other groups that are, more commonly seen carrying weapons and so forth.
Police in Idaho said they've also seized vehicles beyond the U-Haul truck and executed several search warrants in the past day, but couldn't talk about the possibility of new charges or what else they've learned.
Potentially do 2 things, put them in jeopardy and also maybe complicate your ability to identify him.
A graduate student in criminology applied for an internship with local police in nearby Pullman, Washington.
They say the police haven't been transparent and have been giving conflicting accounts of what happened. Meanwhile, local, state, federal officials all working in concert to try to find some scrap of evidence or anything that could push this investigation forward.
Victims, but I was at the vigil last night, and it's like, oh my gosh, you hear the stories. I mean, 3 of the families were there talking about these kids, and it's just heartbreaking. I mean, they were all seemed like incredible kids, hard workers. One was about to graduate, had a job lined up. They were in love. A couple had boyfriends. Just terrible. And again, I mean, it was weird at the vigil too. That it was in an indoor arena. You look up in the rafters, they had police with binoculars, they had undercovers, they had a ton of police, the metal detectors I mentioned. There was a very real concern that the killer could show up at the vigil. I mean, even the dean of students told me that they were prepared for that. So, all of that is going on in these people's minds as they're trying to grieve and figure out what's going on in their town.
And it was mostly the people there. Did they know the victims personally? Is it more of a community coming together? Because we know that, and we'll get to it in a minute, members of the law enforcement is asking members of the community, if you know something, if you have credible information, come forward with it. The majority of the people that were there, did they personally know the people that were affected, the families, or were they there coming together as a community?
I think mostly coming together as a community. I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds. There may have been 1,000 people there. It was pretty full. But again, Greek life is huge here at the University of Idaho. I mean, it's really big, and all of the victims were in different sororities and fraternities.
An event in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. NPR's domestic extremism correspondent Odette Youssef was there, but she says the events she witnessed that day are part of a larger story. Odette, remind us briefly what happened there.
Yeah, we were there to cover a Pride event, Juana, that had been attracting some really violent reaction from the right online. By the afternoon, it was looking like everything actually had gone okay. But then we got word of these arrests happening nearby. So we raced over and saw a huge swarm of police and sheriff's deputies around a U-Haul truck. Turns out the Patriot Front members had been packed inside. So obviously this was a major story, but I think it was one that overshadowed a deeper story in North Idaho, Juana, about how that community has actually confronted far-right violence before and what it takes to do that.
Tell us a little bit more about that history.
Well, back in the 1970s, a man named Richard Butler bought 20 acres of farmland outside of Coeur d'Alene in a place called Hayden. He turned the property into a compound for neo-Nazis, and that organization was called Aryan Nations. It wasn't big. At any given time, there were maybe 1 to 2 dozen people living on it, but it was important. The Aryan Nations compound came to be a hub for organizing the violent racist right. Every year, they'd gather Klansmen, neo-Nazi skinheads, and others for conferences. It was also a problem for the locals, though. In the 1980s, Aryan Nations began a crime spree and even tried assassinating prominent local figures. And here's the thing, this continued, Juana, until Aryan Nations was actually bankrupted in 2000.
Bankrupted? How did that happen?
Well, to answer that question, let's go for a car ride with a local lawyer named Norm Gissel.
You saw the driveway there? There was a big wooden structure over the top of the driveway. It says Aryan Nations, whites only.
The road that Gissel took me along was where a terrifying story began in July of 1998 for Victoria Keenan and her 18-year-old son. They were heading home one night after a wedding in Coeur d'Alene, and Keenan's son had dropped something out of the car. So they retraced their path along the road. So some of the neo-Nazis at the Aryan Nations compound heard the car backfire. They started giving chase, shooting as they followed the Keenan's vehicle. Up the road, Gissel showed me where the Keenan's rear tire blew out.
And she skidded into this ditch right here. She was right here. And then the Nazis then surrounded her car, and the window was down. They started beating on her, hit her in the ribs with the rifle butt. Her son was was cowered into the well of the passenger seat, and he was being beat on, and they were screaming.
Gissel and other community members who'd been organizing against the Aryan Nations wrote to the Southern Poverty Law Center to share the Keenan's story. The SPLC took the case and ultimately won a $6.3 million judgment. This not only rid the community of the compound, but it showed that Richard Butler had badly miscalculated when he thought that North Idahoans would allow their community to become a hub for violent white extremists.
We were able to completely rid ourselves of that group and the kind of awful culture that they were trying to present to our community.
That's Coeur d'Alene's mayor, Jim Hammond, speaking 2 days after the Patriot Front arrests. But many people in that community disagree. They say extremism is once again making its home in North Idaho.
I have heard people say it feels like when the Aryan nations were at its peak. It feels like that.
That's the voice of Jessica Mahurin. She says in the last couple of years, Coeur d'Alene's seen a resurgence of far-right activity. Mahurin's the only paid full-time staff member of the North Idaho Pride Alliance, which organized the Pride in the Park event. For weeks leading up to the event, she, her board members, the event's vendors, and public officials were the target of what she calls an organized right-wing intimidation campaign. There were voicemails, emails, and even reportedly a death threat sent to a city official.
We're going to talk about keeping it confidential.
Since the murders, I mean, is there anyone that you have a weird feeling about that the girls knew or that comes to mind?
A few of the names that have been circulating around, I think it's hard not to kind of, dig into this. And I don't know how much of that is just because we have so little information from law enforcement and how much of it really is, a sister or a father's intuition.
Can you elaborate at all? I don't know. You don't have to give a name, but I mean, is it someone that she knew, or?
I have something to say about that. I just feel like there's been a couple individuals that were cleared very fast. That may not, maybe he shouldn't have been. And yeah.
She had the strong alibi.
Just really fast.
If you can dismiss.
An hour later, and we're like, what? And yeah.
She had the strong alibi.
Just really fast.
If you can dismiss.
An hour later, and we're like, what? And I don't know. I don't know anything about those individuals. I just know they were people that, definitely should have been looked at, and yeah.
Witness security or confidential informants may be required to provide actual testimony at trial because their role in the legal process is often different from that of undercover police officers. Confidential informants typically gather information about criminal activities and provide it to law enforcement agencies while maintaining their anonymity. However, when their information becomes relevant to a criminal case and is used as evidence, they may be called upon to testify in court. This is done to establish the credibility and reliability of their information, and to allow the defense to cross-examine the informant and assess their motives or potential biases. On the other hand, undercover police officers are law enforcement personnel who assume false identities and infiltrate criminal organizations or situations to gather evidence. Their primary function is to covertly gather information and intelligence, and their identities are often protected to ensure the effectiveness of ongoing investigations and officer safety. Due to the sensitive nature of their work, it is generally not necessary for them to testify in court unless there are exceptional circumstances or specific legal requirements.
From white nationalism, a domestic terrorist organization, which has sparked grants and extra money to departments between the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security to protect the citizens and our homeland from being infiltrated by white nationalist organizations.